what are the difference in competitive strengths between Samsung and TSMC in terms of fabs? So I think you pointed out good questions here, because some people may think that TSMC competitors are like Intel, but I think this one, it is quite clear that their biggest competitor is not Intel, it's actually Samsung. It used to be a time when Samsung and TSMC are quite close in terms of their technology. And for example, like Samsung, when it comes to the process nodes, right, they actually took the risk and started with the GAA first. So they are taking some risk in terms of embarking in newer technology. But right now, I think Samsung's, it just shows that they have some problem with their use. Use means that the number of chip that they produce, right? Like what's the defect rate? Because if the yield is too low, right, it will affect their ability to satisfy their customer orders, and also it will have some problem in terms of their, like the profitability, because your fixed assets is the fixed cost, right? But if you unable to churn out enough chips, right, so it will affect their revenues. So Samsung, I think they are facing some difficulties at the moment. I won't say that, I won't brush it off, like say that this is like a downturn for Samsung, they will never come back. It's not like that. So sometimes there will be some, like hiccup, some pauses for one fabs over the other. So those are just normal things. So come back to these competitive strengths questions, right? I think the biggest one is actually the scale, the size. Okay, so if you look at the pure play market shares, right, TSMC, I think if I recall correctly, is about like 60%. So I'm not saying that just because they are large, then they are good. It's not like that. It's more like how can they, like make use of this large scale, like how this large scale actually help them in terms of their technology. So one example that I can point out is that, let's say like now TSMC, right, they have tons of orders coming from Apple, coming from nvda, coming from AMD, and so on, right? So they have all these orders coming in terms of the numbers of chip that they churn out every year, right? It's like huge number. So they are literally the semicon industry themselves, right, when it comes to chip fabrications. So with all these chip making, right, they have, when you're doing a lot, right, that means you are learning a lot. So that when it comes to all these chip manufacturing, there are many details, things that they need to take care of. If your scale is so small, right, if there's any problem, so you face this problem not often enough to have a quick learnings. So for TSMC case, just because their scale is big, they have faced all sorts of questions here and there, and then different people's like tackling problems over the place, and as long as they are able to collaborate, as long as their engineers can learn from each other, so there's a lot of economy of scales that they can harvest. So I think scale is very important in this sense, in helping them to do more, and by doing more, they actually learn more. So this is very important. And then in terms of their capex planning, all those things, just because you have a large scale, right, so you understand the industry more, like in terms of whether the semiconductor industry, is it growing? Should I actually put more money into the capex? All these things, right? If you are just a small player, right? Actually, sometimes let's say your customer say, I want to order, place a huge order. You don't know whether this is a idiosyncratic thing about this specific customer, or is it like an entire industry is moving towards certain directions, right? But if you are big, you have a good understanding on the overall semiconductor industry. I think that's also some strength that's maybe nothing to do with technology or process nodes, but it is very important in terms of their planning, especially like how much capex they want to plan. So I think those are also important. And of course, I think I don't have to keep on repeating about the technology, all those things, because it used to be a time, right? If you look at the history, right, like just 10 years ago, TSMC is not the top, right? Because they are the startup if you compare to Intel, but they really focus on R&D, throw money into R&D, and then focus building trust with their customer. In terms of technology, they are doing a lot, right, just to make sure that they are at the forefront. So they don't want to slow down and then just harvest more and take more money and do a lot of share buyback, those kind of things. So they don't do that. They rather grow slowly, but need to ensure that they always stay at the forefront and stay strong. I think that's the culture that the company have. So those to me is like the competitive strengths. For Samsung, I can't really tell, because my observations on Samsung, right, is that yes, they when it comes to aggressiveness, right, they are very aggressive. And you can see that as a country, right, they're also high-tech countries. They also focus a lot on R&D. They took risks when it comes to like new technology. So those are the good things. It's just that recently when it comes to all this yield, right? They have some problem. That's why TSMC grew stronger, right? Because of that. So this is like a competition, and this will stay for some time now. Do you think the ability to squeeze more transistor into a chip be limited, resulting in very low yields and high costs that can't be justified? So I think this one, right, is not new. So if you follow the history of all these transistors, right, just follow Moore's law, right? Every year they're trying to squeeze more transistors into the chip. They are trying to string the transistor from, like don't know how many 15, 70 nanometers down to now we're talking about 5 nanometer, 4, 3, 2 nanometers, right? So this one will continue. And as these process nodes, right, keep on shrinking, right, of course the cost is getting higher and higher. This is very, very clear. That's why if you observe semicon or specifically foundry business, right, there are less and less players. This is because the ticket size, right, like the amount of money that you need to spend in capex just to set up a fab, right, as you move to 5 nanometer, 3 nanometer and so on, is getting a lot more costly. That's why there's no choice, right? Some foundry, they will just say, okay, I'm going to stop at, let's say, like 14 nanometer. I'm not going to proceed further just because the cost is too high. The ROC is not high enough. They will just drop out, right? So that's just the trend of the entire business. Higher cost definitely is the trend. As the strings become smaller and smaller, things are getting a lot more difficult, and yields also getting a lot more challenging to get a decent yield. This is also true. I think in terms of yield, there's still a lot of things that they are, like the entire supply chain, they are trying to do their best to make it possible. Say, for example, let's say ASML, right? They produce EUV. That's a breakthrough already. Then now they are producing high-end NA EUV, so another breakthrough. So with all this breakthrough in technology, right, they are able to still getting a decent yield, even though they already shrink to a very, very small size. That's why the price also skyrocketed, but yield is something that they are able to manage. We don't know like all these things, whether you can keep on extrapolate from, like from 3 nanometer to 2 to 1 nanometers, like how long all these things can last, right? Will all the capex spent into all this technology, are they able to generate sufficient return on capital or not? So I think I can understand that there will be some, like skeptics when it comes to these kind of things. But I would say that in terms of the business, right, still, there are many advancements in technology. It's not about just shrinking, right? Because technology, there are, like all the backside power delivery, all those things. And then they are moving to the GAA soon. So all this technology is not just about the shrinking. Shrinking is just one of them, right? There are many other areas that they are innovating. And by innovating all these things, right, they are able to make the chips better and more power efficient. And this is very important, right? Because imagine that, let's say they just stop there, and then the next scaling is not about technology anymore. It's just like producing more and more chips, right? So if that's the case, then in terms of the power demands, it will just be crazy, right? If you just monitor the semicon industry, right, I think all this technology, sometimes they talk about chiplet, sometimes they talk about like stacking the chips. So there are so many things, and there are huge incentive in trying to bring all this technology, try to make it better, try to make it more powerful and more efficient. This will continue. I don't expect all these, like innovations just to stop, right? Just because it's getting harder to shrink. So everyone is working very hard to, like make sure things are okay. The good thing is that the technology, the market, right, is not stagnant. Because imagine that, let's say we don't have AI now. Yeah, and everyone just use handphone, and the handphone also you don't need like super high powerful chip anymore, right? Currently, the newest smartphones chips is already very powerful. If the market demand is stagnant, and then when it comes to all these process nodes technology also stagnant, then maybe it's true that everything could become stagnant, right? But the market is not like that. There's always more needs, right? Like, for example, there's breakthrough in terms of the AI in all this open AI, ChatGPT stuff. Now, there's a lot of growth when it comes to GPU side, when it comes to all the ASIC, all the AI accelerator and so on. So there will always be new needs, right? Or new requirements that then the incentives will forever be there, right? So people want a better chip. And that's why all this technology needs to move on. And there's a lot of incentives to push all this keep going. So I would say that that's my general comment when looking at your questions. But the question is like, does it justify or not? Sometimes I think that there's more than just technology in the equations. There's also the market side. There's also the innovation side. Like for example, now we don't have to worry because you look at NVIDIA chips, right? It's so expensive, but still customer wants it, right? For all sorts of different technology, AI related stuff, right? So even though all this is high cost, but it will be justified just because the end demands, right, is there. There's a strong demands there. So that's the one that push the entire industry forward. What barriers protect TSMC moat? Are they gated technology, high upkeep costs, talent pool, etc.? Which advantage do you think is the most fragile? So I think this one I mentioned just now about the scale. I think scale is the most important one. If you talk about the gated tech knowledge, I actually don't think so, because let's say TSMC is quite a big company, you know. If you talk about like all the other foundries, right? It's not like others are stagnant, sitting there not doing anything, right? You know, for example, let's say SMIC, they also knows that all this engineer knowledge is very important. They try to, you know, like try to get TSMC engineers, and they get a few high-profile engineers from TSMC just to help them with their technologies, right? So I think all this will continue. It is not something like a knowledge that other people cannot steal. I think this is actually possible. But the good thing is that I think their current large scale is definitely one thing that is harder to steal. So that's one. The other thing is that I think right now, I think still majority of their fabs is in Taiwan, and then Taiwan government is very, very friendly, very, very supportive when it comes to this semicon industry, because TSMC is not just the only one semicon companies in Taiwan, right? So this is like the high profile TSMC big names here, right? But the entire supply chains, like big supply chain is in Taiwan. So the Taiwanese government is very supportive. Say for example, let's say TSMC want to get a parcel of land, government is very supportive. They say we need the water, we need the electricity. The government also very supportive. So those also I think is considered one of the moats. Let's say for other countries, you can't be sure, right? Let's say there's a fab in Germany, and then when there's a shortage of electricity, do you actually prioritize the electricity to residential area or to the fabs, right? I think for Taiwanese government, definitely fabs is the high priority, right? So I think that's also one thing that I would like to mention. I think culture is also important. Culture is harder to replicate. That's why initially when they set up fabs in US, sometimes, you know, I'm a bit skeptical on whether it will work, because when you set up something in US, so does the new fabs in US follow culture in Taiwan, or do they follow the culture in US, right? So there's some question mark there, but luckily I think recent progress is doing well. So that's something good to see. But when they are in the midst of problems, right, like they can't get the enough laborers, and then especially skilled laborers, right? So there's one period that people are skeptical on all this effort about setting fabs in US. So I can understand those concerns. I think when it comes to the Taiwanese semicon industry, right, their culture is really, really crazy. Say for example, one thing I remember is that they have a 12 months shift, right? So instead of like working 12-hour shift. So instead of like, let's say if you have 8-hour shift, then every day is like 3 shift, right? But theirs is like 12 hours. So only 2 shifts per day. So less shift means that less hands over to the one that's upcoming, and then pick up the progress, right? So I think that's also something that's related to their culture, their collaborative culture. So all those things are all important. And of course, I think technology or all this knowledge is also important. It's just that I don't think it's something that they can keep, because all these skilled laborers, right, to a certain extent, they still, like move around. So that's why I think that one could be the one that is not so like more fragile as compared to the others. Like the scale, that one is really very hard to replicate because they've been in this industry for some time. They already built out the scale. So that one is the hardest one to steal. What are the fundamental skills that talents at semi-fabs must have? What kind of incentive do you think is good for holding on to such talents? And then, are there value destructive behavior that these talents can have? Or is it a technical wins all situation? Well, this one, let's say fundamental skills, right? I'm not in the semicon industry, so I can't, give you a lot of details when it comes to all this. So to me, right, I will just frame it as these are all related to engineering skills that, for example, let's say they just, because the entire process, the entire semicon manufacturing, right, there are many steps, right? So all the etching, all the, a lot of stuff. I can't give you the full details here because I'm not the expert here. So there are many different steps. So each steps, right, there are experts, there are engineers that specialize into those areas. So material science and so on. So all these are very important. But if you ask me what are the incentives, I can't. I think incentives boil down to two things, right? One is that you need to have a good salary, good package to your employees. That's one. And then you need to give them a decent working environment, decent culture, very collaborative kind of place instead of like, people just stabbing each other. So I think these are also important, right? But these are, I would say, quite general. I can't really give you anything that's specific to semicon industry. Yeah, that's one. In terms of destructive behavior, I would say maybe let's say like come back to the culture things. You're working in a good environment when you're happy, you're working around with the fellow colleagues that you actually likes to spend time with. I think those are very important. Yeah, if people keep on like stabbing each other, I think it'll be gone case now. So but right now, based on their work culture, I'll say that they have a quite a decent work culture. But again, these are based on some like interviews, some videos that I've watched. I personally I don't recall. I have some friends working in semicon industry, but not TSMC and definitely not Taiwan. So I also can't give you a lot of all this story on their culture. Then come to the last sentence here, technical win-all. Is it technical win-all? Again, I don't think so. It is very important for sure, but I don't think that it is just like, oh, they know certain things that other fabs don't know, like just one knowledge and then they win all, right? I don't think so. These are actually all the minor things is at the implementations. It could be things that the knowledge to operate the, let's say, like the EUV machines, right? These are also very specialized knowledge. And then what's kind of situations that they need to, solve the problems on the spot, or what are the situations they need to get the engineers from SML. So it is a lot of collaborative effort within the fabs and also with their equipment suppliers, engineers, right? So I think all these are, like quite messy. But what they want to do is just to make sure that all these machines keep on running. If there's a problem, they need to fix it as soon as possible. And just like I talk about culture, right? There's some, like stories. Maurice Chung also shared this, right? Let's say if you are working in semicon industry, you're working for TSMC, right? Machine breakdown in the middle of the night. If you are the one that able to solve it, right, you will just wake up and go and solve it, right? So these are the culture that to them is like normal. It is, if you work in semicon industry, that's something that you have signed up for. But if you talk about other markets, let's say like some European fabs, or you're talking about US fabs, right? This kind of culture, it may not be there, right? Because people might think that, okay, if there's machine breakdown middle of the night, I can solve it next morning, right? So that's why it's about like priority, right? When we talk about culture, do you prioritize your employees' sleep, or do you prioritize meeting the orders? For TSMC case, they are really, like customer is the most important one. So this is the culture they have built over time. How do you think about SBC valuations for stocks that rise a lot recently? For example, nvda would recognize cost of SBC at grant date and amortise straight line. But as the stock price increased dramatically afterwards, the economic costs of this SBC are higher than what is reflected on the income statement. So I think when it comes to stock-based compensations valuations, right? Like I said, I don't focus too much on like specific numbers that they pay out. Because if you look at, let's say, NVIDIA, right? Of course, they have all these stock-based compensations, but at the same time, they also have a share buyback. Good thing is that over time, the shares outstanding is not increasing. They're actually shrinking, right? So you can just think of like they actually use the money they used to share buyback, partly also used to, give stock SBC to their employees. So to me, that's just is part of their compensations. I'm not that worried because to me, right, companies like NVIDIA, the most important thing is their talents. So you want to keep all these talents around. And if you want to keep them, right, you cannot expect that you could just pay them some small amount and then expect them to stay long, right? So of course, you want them to continue to stay with the company, continue to build on top of whatever that they have. And these are, like great talent, right? So they just want to keep all these big talents, great talents. They just spend all this money, right? I think to me, I don't have a problem to pay them good money. So in terms of accounting, all those things to me not so important. The more important one is that if you are able to keep all this talent, your talents don't run away and set up shop elsewhere. Because you need to remember for companies like NVIDIA, right? They are like pure chip design company. So for let's say a talented engineer or a software engineer, maybe if they are so talented that they can just set up shops and go and disrupt you later on, right? It's better to pay them a lot now and they stay with the company and you build on strength. And just because you look at how much, the amount that they pay to their employees, right? Just look at the expenses. It's not like super high in aggregate. But once they have all these good products, and we are talking about like 35 billions of revenues in one quarter, you can forget about all these, like other small things about SBC and so on, right? I would say these are relatively minors. But of course, let's say if companies that you are confident that, let's say the companies, the talents run away, they can't disrupt you if you are sure of that. And then if they run away, you know that you are able to find someone to replace. So in a way, all these talents, they are replaceable, right? Then you can squeeze them. But in NVIDIA case, I don't think that is important right now. I think the more important thing is still have all this talent around and then continue to stay disciplined, continue to execute, continue to serve their customers. I think those are a lot more important as compared to like all these things. I won't generalize this comment to all companies because I know that for some companies, their SBC is higher than their share buyback and then they just have huge dilutions, right? That will be concerning for me. But in NVIDIA case, I don't think it's that concerning. So that's my view. Okay. Again, all this is personal preference. You focus on something that's important to you. I focus on things that are important to me. Sometimes it's like we focus on different things. There's no right and wrong in this case. Actually, I really like you, Boon Tee. I hope I can be your partner. I hope that you mean business partner, but right now I'm still working, can't really, investing full time. So I'm not looking for someone to like partner up to do full time investment, right? So I still continue with my day job, and then all these YouTube things is just hobbies and just help up the community. Okay, this question is not for me. Okay, Web, if we are starting from zero today, what should we do if we want to be financially free as soon as possible to enjoy life and not work anymore? Like you, life is not easy. Okay, I think good questions. And for those who are not in Telegram group, right, welcome you to join. And actually, Mr. Webb here is already give a good response, good advice in terms of like these questions. I won't repeat that. Yeah, I think good response. But I think all these things, right, still boil down to like disciplines. You want to, look for a job, whether it's a job, whether it's a business, it needs to be something that you are passionate about, you don't mind spending time on, something that you are able to grow doing that things over and over, right? So I think that's more important, and not like just everyday work and think about like how soon can I stop working, right? So if you don't enjoy your work, maybe try to look for something else to work on, something that you are more passionate about, rather than keep on thinking about stop working. Because the moment you have enough money and you stop working, and then you still need something to fill on that gap, right? And I think you rather how to say, you want to think of where to go instead of where to leave. You don't want to think of how soon that you want to leave your job. You want to think of like where you want to go, because the place that you want to go, right, maybe you can go there while keeping your job. Who knows, right? What are the most significant business challenges pure play foundries and no-fabs chips designer face? I think these tools, right, although all these pure play foundries and fabless chip designers, they are in semicon industry, but actually their business model, they are completely different. But they are all driven by some similar factors, which is the semicon industry. So let's start from foundries. I think for foundries, right, the most challenging part is all these capex. Say for example, like now everyone they say they want a lot of chips. Okay, they need a lot of demand. So all these foundries, they look at all this demand, they keep on spending on capex, keep on building fabs. If you build too many fabs, then suddenly the demand just collapses, right? Then you are overspent on your capex and you don't have enough orders to make a decent return on all these capital expenditures, right? So that will be gone already for your business. You will really, really suffer a lot of losses. And the losses specifically is that you funded all these fabs already. There's no orders. You need to turn off all these fabs and scale down your productions. And then basically you just spend tens of billions of dollars and they just sit there doing nothing, right? All this will have a huge impact in terms of their financials. So to gauge where the market is going, to manage the cost, to spend enough of their capex to meet customer demand, but not too much to the extent that they will face a problem of not enough orders, right? So those are the parts that is quite difficult. And of course, the other stuff will be, they still need to innovate, they still need to, like, the cost side, I think there are a few things like all these fabs and also the EUV machines are also expensive. So those are also things that they are facing. So it's a ROC problem, it's a capex kind of problems that they are facing. And when it comes to all this foundry business, right, it's still a very competitive business. So let's say if you are doing everything right, but your competitors, they are having a big breakthrough, and just because of that big breakthrough, their yield is very high. So those can also disrupt your business. So you need to be careful on those as well, right? So yeah, I think that those are very important. Now, when it comes for all these chip design companies, right, for NVIDIA, for AMD, it's competitions, because you are designing chip, I'm designing chips. Let's say your competitors is able to design a much better chips, right? Then how are you going to win business, right? So that's one thing. Competition. Second thing is like, how are you able to secure all this capacity to fabs the chips that you need? Sometimes it's like you design good enough chips, but your competitors just gobble up all the chip capacity that's around, right? Say for example during chip shortage environment or situations, right? Then you can't get the capacity, so you have problems producing enough chips for your customer. There's also some problem that you could be facing, right? So those also quite hard to manage. Maybe the other things is that sometimes the entire business is moving, and then if you are not moving fast enough, right, so also very difficult to catch up. Say for example, let's say like Intel case, right, they could be doing everything right on their chips, but let's say if the entire industry is moving to ARMs, right, and then they just lose out, they don't have enough chip, their chip is mainly still x86, right? So all these platform shift also can cause some disruptions in terms of like how can they win business or not. So these are also things that they could be facing. So very different business, very different dynamics. Each have their own challenges. Different business so hard to compare. And all these foundries and chip design company, they also like have to cooperate, have to collaborate in many things. That also can pose some challenges. What do you think about the investment runway for the companies you own? What insights can you share that makes you believe the opportunities runway is very long? I think this one maybe just focus on their growth right now. Say, for example, right, you can say that companies like Apple, because Apple, their growth is like lower, right? And they have been using their money to do all this share buyback, return capital to their shareholders. I will agree with you that the reinvestment runway for Apple might be lower as compared to other companies. But let's say if you talk about other companies, say for example like NVIDIA, they, in terms of their reinvestment, maybe even they don't need to reinvest a lot, but still able to increase their revenue, just build on top of their current strength, right? So that's also not a big concern. But for companies like TSMC, I would say that definitely they have to reinvest, because you just look at their capex numbers, right? They're talking about like 40 billions of capex just in 1 year, right? So they have to keep on reinvest, and we hope that they are able to have a good pricing when it comes to the chips that they're going to produce in the next few years. So to justify the ROC, right? If not, it also could be a problem. But when it comes to reinvestment, they have to keep reinvest. So no choice on that. Other companies, what else? For Microsoft, I think definitely no problem. They have tons of things that they can innovate, right? When it comes to software, there are so many things they can work on. So there's still a lot of reinvestment. They're still growing. And sometimes they acquire other companies. So that to me is also something like a strategic investment to strengthen their business when it comes to for example like gaming, right? There's also reinvestment runway. I would say company by company. I won't generalize here, but I would say that I will have one eye in terms of their growth, whether they are growing or not. Let's say if they are shrinking, they can't reinvest, they are in a sunset industry, probably these are not the companies that I want to invest in. What are your long-term plans when nearer to FIRE? Do you maintain portfolio or switch to more index funds? I think the switching to more index funds, this is definitely one thing that I mentioned many times, but in terms of implementation is a bit slow. But this is not because of the FIRE. This is more because I don't want to have too much money in individual stocks, because we want to manage the estate tax, right? So say for example, let's say if I pass away now, I mean US government is going to tax a lot in terms of the portfolio. All these individual stocks, they're going to tax. So I think the right way to approach this is really to shift my investment to more usage ETF. So I think that should be the direction. It's just that it's like gradually invest more into usage ETF. But when it comes to fire or not, maybe yes. Maybe we'll do some changes. But let's say if talking about fire, right? If I want to, one day I foresee that I'm going to stop working in, let's say like 3 or 5 years time, right? I will start to prepare in terms of the cash flow. Say for example, having more cash flow in, let's say just T-bill, so that there's all these maturity. So T-bill can help me get some cash flow. That's one. And then secondly, maybe I will allocate more into REITs, because REITs you don't have to sell, you can just have cash flow. I think that's also helpful in terms of the cash flow planning. REITs is definitely one, and maybe some bank stock as well. But REITs is easier because some REITs, right, they actually pay quarterly dividends, right? So it is really helpful when plan for your cash flow. Those are the things that I will consider. But right now, I don't have any plan to fire unless really my company say that they want to retrench me. Hopefully not happening. But let's say if they retrench me, also I will just look for jobs elsewhere, right? So no plan for fire at the moment. Boon Tee, can you elaborate on web formula on RoIC growth rate that he shared with group last night? Also how this LVMH, for example, works. But I really don't have a lot of details to add here. I mean, these are just mathematical derivations, right? All right, I'll give up on this. Forgive me. Thoughts on Adobe down but doesn't seem cheap enough yet. Yeah, for Adobe, this one also I discuss sometimes with my friends. Like, do we, like looking at Adobe, is it a company that is like, high moat companies that's good to invest, or are we having some problem here? In terms of their core business, right, I think the Adobe core business is still very strong. And let's say if you think that all this AI is coming to disrupt Adobe, right, I also don't think so, because Adobe themselves, right, they're investing heavily in terms of all this generative AI stuff, and they have all the data that they need to make all these generative AI offerings good, right? So I think their core business when it comes to creative works and so on, I think this will be very stable. I don't think they will be disrupted that easily. With that said, there is still some, like startups that is trying to, like get into all this space, right? Say one example is Canva. Actually, personally, I'm using Canva. I think that Canva is, I won't say that they are disrupting Adobe, but I'm thinking that, let's say Adobe, they are mostly used by professionals. And if you are professionals, you are doing all this commercial work, right? If you are using Adobe products, I don't think you will, get away or get out this ecosystem that easily. But for layman's, for retails, for like, small user, if you are used to Canva, you also won't like use Adobe. So I think in that sense, I think Canva, I would think that their market shares, right, is, it could be small today, but it can become a lot larger because they are able to make their products so easy to use, so intuitive to use. So it's quite, how to say, quite promising. So that's why I would say that there's some startups that's trying to disrupt this space, but ultimately I don't think they are like fighting for the same pie, because their business is somewhat different. Come back to Adobe, right? I would say that yes, I agree with you that the valuation wise is not really cheap. It came down from a high valuation, but for now, I don't know. I'm not investing just because the valuations, I don't think is like that cheap. Mainly it's a valuations problem. Let's say when it comes to all this, because Adobe, I think they are subscription business, right? So if I compare other subscription business, I would rather just invest in Microsoft. So that's my view. I don't have a specific comment in terms of their product. I personally using Adobe Premiere Pro in my video editings. So I can see that there are some tools, some advanced tools that for professionals, they can't get rid of. So it's quite sticky, I would say. Maybe valuations drop furthermore, it will make it a lot more enticing to invest in, but not now. From Anderson, some really good questions. Yeah, I think I like that all these questions, it all, like focusing on TSMC, and we can have more in-depth discussion. again, all these things, right? Sometimes it's hard for me. You can see I struggle, right, when it comes to answering all these questions because I'm not from semiconductor industry. But we do our best, right, as a retail investor. If you invest in all these companies, you need to know all these things. But our knowledge when it comes to all these areas is still limited just because we are not in the industry, right? So that's why I would say, yes, still can invest, still can focus on long term, still can try to understand the investment thesis, but we will never know a lot as compared to those in the industry and those analysts that cover the sector. Sometimes that's why it will never give me high convictions to say I all in my entire portfolio in one company. So that's why, our understanding, we can't really beat the market just because my understanding of the company is more than the other investor out there, right? So that's not something that I'm trying to do here. But what I'm trying to do here is to say that we as a retail investor, if you just focus on the fundamentals, you invest in companies, great business, right? You don't need to know more than others. You just need to know enough so that you just invest in the companies, just adopt like a long-term investor mindset. You can hold on to a companies and just get whatever return that you get from that companies, right? Whether all this knowledge can help you beat the market, I actually doubt so. So it helped me in terms of holding my companies and not panic sell. But it's not good enough for me to, generate a sustainable high alpha. Because if I'm so confident about my alpha, right, then I will just be a hedge fund managers, right? So, but the thing is not, other analysts, they really have a lot of informations that we don't have. So they have some, information alpha that I don't have. Thank you so much for tuning in. See you in the next one. Bye bye.